I never expected my life to start unraveling during something as ordinary as unpacking old photos. But as I sifted through stacks of fading memories, the stark contrast between my childhood and my sister Sophia's came back to haunt me. Our lives had always been a tale of two daughters, identical twins, yet treated as opposites. One adored, the other tolerated. Yet, no one seemed to notice except me. Sophia was the golden child, the daughter who could do no wrong. From the moment we could walk, it became clear that she was the centerpiece of our family's universe. My memories of childhood always seemed hazy, filled with scenes where I was merely a spectator in someone else's story. If there was a birthday, Sophia's gifts were extravagant while mine were practical. If there was a school event, our parents' eyes followed her, their applause reserved for her victories, while my own achievements barely earned a passing glance. One Christmas stands out like a thorn in my memory. I had asked for a sketchbook and pencils. Art had become my sanctuary, a quiet corner of my life, where I could create something that felt uniquely mine. When I unwrapped my gift, I found a generic half-used notebook. The edges were frayed, the paper yellowed. Meanwhile, Sophia sat amidst a mountain of shiny wrapping paper, clutching a brand new keyboard, exactly the one she had asked for. Her delighted laughter still echoes in my mind. There were countless moments like that, so many that they blurred into a pattern I couldn't ignore. Yet, the worst of it wasn't the gifts or the lack of attention. It was the conversation I overheard one rainy afternoon, a moment that split my life into a before and an after. I had come home early from school, soaked from the unexpected downpour, and quietly crept inside to avoid drawing attention. The murmur of voices from the kitchen stopped me in my tracks. My parents were talking, and their words carried a weight that settled in my chest like a stone. "Sometimes I think we should have just had one," my mother's voice said, laced with weariness. "Sophia's everything we wanted in a daughter. Emma tries, but she's different," my father replied after a pause. "She'll figure things out eventually, I suppose." I didn't need to hear more. Those words carved a scar deep into my soul. They didn't want me, at least not the way they wanted Sophia. For years, I had tried to win their approval, hoping that one day they'd look at me with the same pride they reserved for her. But that day never came. Hearing their disappointment so plainly spelled out wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. That night, I sat in my room and stared at the faded stars on my ceiling, remnants of a childhood dream I no longer believed in. If my parents couldn't see my worth, I decided I'd stop seeking their validation. Something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply stopped caring. Instead, I redirected every ounce of my energy towards school and my art. I told myself I didn't need them, that I'd build a future so far beyond their small world that they'd have no choice but to regret their words. For the first time in my life, I felt a spark of control over my own destiny. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was enough to start stitching together a sense of purpose. I buried myself in textbooks and sketchpads, every A on my report card, and every completed drawing a quiet rebellion against their indifference. Yet, even as I worked toward a new version of myself, the bitterness lingered, a shadow I couldn't entirely escape. Success has a way of shining a harsh light on hidden resentments. For the first time in my life, I wasn't merely invisible. My teachers began to notice my efforts, singling me out for my creativity and discipline. My sketches, once confined to the back of old notebooks, were now displayed on classroom walls. Straight A's lined my report cards, and my name frequently appeared on the honor roll. But this newfound recognition didn't sit well with Sophia. Her reactions started subtly at first, an exaggerated yawn when I shared good news, or a sharp remark cloaked in humor about how much time I spent with my nose in books. It escalated when a teacher praised my work during a parent-teacher meeting, a rare instance where our mother, Karen, bothered to attend. I remember sitting in that sterile room as my teacher beamed, holding up one of my drawings as an example of exemplary effort. Karen's expression shifted, her lips tightening into a thin line. When we got home, Karen's disappointment boiled over. She accused the school of favoritism, insisting that they were neglecting Sophia's potential. Her words stung, not because they devalued my accomplishments, but because of the clear message beneath them. I could never outshine Sophia in her eyes. Sophia, emboldened by Karen's defense, ramped up her provocations. She'd snicker about my after-school job at the local cafe, making snide comments about smelling like grease and coffee. Her words were designed to cut deep, targeting the one thing I had started to build for myself, my independence. But I refused to let her barbs derail me. If anything, they fueled my determination. I worked longer shifts, saved every dollar, and funneled my frustrations into my art. Still, the tension was suffocating. I needed an outlet, a way to escape the relentless comparison and criticism. It was during one of these desperate moments that I stumbled across a piece of my family's puzzle I hadn't realized was missing. While sorting through old documents to help Karen with a household project, I found an envelope tucked away in the back of a drawer. It was addressed to my grandparents, Margaret and George, names I had only heard in passing, and always in a tone that suggested they were unwelcome topics of conversation. The envelope contained a letter written years ago, full of apologies and attempts at reconciliation. Date suggested it had been sent shortly before I was born, but it was clear it had never reached its intended recipients. Questions swirled in my mind. Who were these people? Why had they been erased from our lives? The curiosity was irresistible. It took weeks of covert internet searches and whispers to piece together enough information to locate them. I learned that they lived a few towns over, in a modest but well-maintained house. Their address felt like a lifeline, a chance to explore a side of my family that had been deliberately hidden from me. The idea of meeting them sparked equal parts excitement and fear. Would they even want to see me? What if they were nothing like I imagined? In the end, my curiosity outweighed my doubts. I didn't tell anyone of my plan, knowing it would only provoke a fight. One Saturday morning, I packed a small bag and left a hastily written note on the counter, claiming I had a shift at the cafe. My heart raced as I boarded the bus, each mile bringing me closer to answers I wasn't sure I was ready for. As the bus pulled into their quiet neighborhood, a wave of anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. But I reminded myself that I wasn't just searching for them, I was searching for a part of myself that had always been missing. The decision to knock on their door felt monumental, a step into an unknown that promised either connection or rejection. Whatever awaited me on the other side, I knew I couldn't turn back now. When Margaret opened the door, her expression shifted from curiosity to warmth in an instant. She didn't ask who I was. It was as though she already knew. Without hesitation, she invited me in, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. George appeared moments later, his kind eyes surveying me with a mixture of surprise and delight. The house was modest, yet every detail exuded care and thoughtfulness. It was hard to believe they were the same people my parents had dismissed as unworthy of mention. Over steaming cups of tea, they listened intently as I explained who I was and why I had come. Margaret's face softened with every word, while George's nods of understanding felt like the acceptance I had longed for but never received. They didn't seem angry or resentful about the years we had been kept apart. Instead, they seemed overjoyed to finally have a chance to know me. What struck me most was their modesty. Despite the humble appearance of their home, small hints revealed a life of affluence they chose not to flaunt. Their car, neatly parked outside, was a luxury model. A painting in the living room bore the signature of a renowned artist. They shared stories of traveling the world and their contributions to various charitable causes. Yet, their demeanor remained grounded and genuine. For the first time, I felt the warmth of unconditional acceptance. Our bond grew quickly. I started visiting them every weekend, each trip revealing more layers of their fascinating lives. Margaret encouraged my artistic pursuits, gifting me a high-quality sketchbook and professional-grade pencils. George shared stories of his business ventures and how he'd learned to prioritize people over profits. They became the mentors I never knew I needed, offering guidance and encouragement without the heavy-handed expectations I had grown up with. Around this time, Preparations for graduation loomed large in my life. Against all odds, I had secured the title of valedictorian. The announcement brought mixed emotions. On one hand, it validated years of hard work and resilience. On the other, I dreaded how my family might react. True to form, Karen's response was lukewarm. She dismissed my achievement as if it were a minor detail, her focus squarely on Sophia's upcoming dance recital. My father's reaction was even more muted, a brief, "well done," before he retreated to his office. The final blow came a week later. Karen announced plans for a family vacation to Hawaii, a celebratory trip for Sophia's accomplishments. Only 3 tickets had been purchased, one for each of them. I wasn't invited. The casual cruelty of their decision left me numb, but not surprised. Years of neglect had prepared me for this moment. Margaret and George, however, had other plans. When I shared the news with them, they exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. The following weekend, they asked me to meet them outside their home. George stood beside a sleek, black car, the keys dangling from his fingers. It was a gift, they explained, a reward for my perseverance and achievements. The gesture overwhelmed me. It wasn't just the car, it was the recognition, the belief in my potential that made the moment unforgettable. Driving home that day, the miles melted away under the hum of the engine, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of freedom. Margaret and George had given me more than a vehicle. They had given me a sense of belonging and a reminder that I was worthy of love and support. It wasn't the life I had grown up with, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally take control of my destiny. The day my family returned from Hawaii was one I had mentally prepared for, though no amount of anticipation could fully brace me for the storm that awaited. Their trip, a glossy highlight reel of beaches and sunsets, had been flaunted across social media, making it abundantly clear I had been excluded. I expected the tension to escalate when they saw the sleek black car parked neatly in the driveway. Their reactions didn't disappoint. Karen and James' faces contorted with confusion as they stepped out of the taxi. Sophia, carrying an armful of lace, froze mid-step, her eyes widening as if the car itself had insulted her. The silence hung heavy for a moment before the questions came, rapid and accusatory. Karen's voice, sharp as ever, cut through the air as she demanded answers. James' curiosity was quieter, but no less probing. I explained, with measured calm, that the car had been a gift from Margaret and George, my grandparents. The words landed like a thunderclap. Karen's expression twisted into something between disbelief and outrage. The very mention of their names was enough to ignite a firestorm. She demanded to know why I had gone behind her back and contacted them. As I recounted the truth, her anger only grew. The revelation of Margaret and George's wealth was salt in the wound. Karen's fury wasn't just about the car or the connection I had rekindled. It was about control, about the narrative she had tried so hard to maintain. She had painted them as distant, irrelevant figures, yet here they were, proving to be not only present but also supportive in ways she had never been. James' reaction was more subdued, but his disapproval was clear. Their unity against me was predictable, but it no longer intimidated me. Sophia, emboldened by Karen's indignation, declared that the car should be hers. She framed her demand as though it were a matter of fairness, arguing that she was more deserving. Karen, of course, backed her without hesitation. They expected me to capitulate, as I always had. But this time was different. Years of being overshadowed and undermined had forged a resilience within me I hadn't fully realized until that moment. I met their demands with a firm refusal. The car was mine, a symbol of my achievements and the support Margaret and George had shown me. Sophia's protests grew louder, her entitlement on full display, but I didn't waver. Karen's attempts to mediate in Sophia's favor only strengthened my resolve. For the first time, I wasn't seeking their approval. I was standing my ground. The confrontation escalated further when Karen and James resorted to threats. They hinted that if I didn't comply, I would no longer be welcome under their roof. Their words were meant to intimidate, to push me back into submission. But what they didn't realize was that I had already prepared for this possibility. Without a word, I led them upstairs to my room. The sight of my packed bags waiting by the door stopped them in their tracks. My room, once a chaotic jumble of books and art supplies, was now bare, stripped of anything that made it mine. I explained calmly that I had no intention of staying where I wasn't wanted. Margaret and George had offered me a place with them, a home where I could finally feel supported and respected. Karen's anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. James' expression remained stoic, though I sensed a twinge of regret behind his eyes. Sophia, however, looked genuinely stunned. Perhaps she hadn't expected me to call their bluff. As I carried my bags to the car, the weight of years of disappointment and resentment began to lift. Margaret and George's support had given me not just a way out but a sense of worth I had never known. Driving away from that house, I felt an unfamiliar yet comforting sense of freedom. This wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was the beginning of something far better, a life I could finally call my own. The move to my own apartment marked the beginning of a life I had only dreamed of. Margaret and George had not only offered me a place in their hearts, but also practical support. They found a cozy studio in a bustling part of town and covered the rent as a graduation gift. It was simple but perfect, a small balcony overlooking a park, a space filled with light and possibility. For the first time, I had a place that felt truly mine, untainted by the shadows of my past. As I settled into my new home, preparations for my next chapter began. Acceptance to Princeton had been a distant dream, one I never thought I could achieve without support. Yet here I was, standing on the threshold of a future I had built with determination and the unwavering encouragement of Margaret and George. They helped me navigate the logistics of enrollment, from paperwork to shopping for supplies, their pride in me evident in every gesture. Meanwhile, my parents' attempts to reconcile with Margaret and George became a predictable spectacle. Word of my grandparents' wealth had traveled fast, and Karen wasted no time trying to mend the rift she had spent years deepening. She reached out under the guise of family unity, but her true intentions were thinly veiled. George's polite but firm refusal to engage left her fuming. Margaret, ever composed, made it clear that their loyalty was to me now, a decision that only deepened the chasm between us. Sophia's involvement was equally transparent. Her entitlement knew no bounds, and she made no effort to hide her resentment toward me. She blamed me for the growing distance between our parents and grandparents, conveniently ignoring the years of neglect and favoritism that had led to this point. Her messages grew increasingly bitter until I made the decision to cut all ties. Blocking their contacts felt like shedding a heavy, oppressive weight. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was necessary. For years, their presence in my life had been a source of pain and self-doubt. By setting that boundary, I reclaimed the power they had held over me. Margaret and George supported my decision, reminding me that protecting my peace was not selfish, but essential. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself flourishing in ways I hadn't thought possible. Princeton was everything I had hoped for, and more. The campus buzzed with energy and opportunity, and I threw myself into my studies with the same determination that had carried me through high school. My art, once a quiet rebellion, became a source of pride and recognition. Professors praised my work, and peers sought me out for collaborations. For the first time, I felt seen not as someone's shadow but as a person with value and potential. Margaret and George's visits became a cherished routine. They attended my exhibitions, offering quiet encouragement and unspoken validation. Their unwavering belief in me filled the void left by my parents' indifference. In their presence, I found a sense of family that wasn't defined by obligation, but by genuine connection. The emotional scars of my past didn't vanish overnight, but they began to fade. Every milestone, every small victory, felt like a step toward healing. The peace I had longed for was no longer an abstract concept, but a tangible reality. I woke each day with a sense of purpose, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. The final chapter of my journey wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It was in the quiet moments, the sunlight streaming through my apartment windows, the laughter shared with new friends, the satisfaction of a day well spent. My life had become a canvas, and for the first time, I was the artist free to create something beautiful and entirely my own.